It's your boy Incon here with some magical item changes in Season 7 Smite. So this is not like a little bit of a change to items. This is not like, hey, Season 6 Smite, we are going to just a little bit change up some things about our items. This is like, hey, something is fundamentally broken with magical penetration, and we are going to take a shot at fixing it. And so they are really breaking wide open how magical items in Smite are going to work, in drastically changing how builds are going to be done, the variety of builds you're going to be able to do, how important certain things are by completely changing up magical penetration. So they fundamentally come down that there's two problems with magical items in Smite, which is specifically the penetration, that being Spear of the Magus and Ob Shard. You have to either buy Spear of the Magus or Ob Shard for your pen, no matter what, on mages, right? Spear of the Magus, if you can use it perfectly, aka Merlin, Gooby, etc., it is the better item. But most mages simply can't use it effectively. So everybody else and their mom defaults to buying Ob Shard because you have to have pen and you don't really proc Spear of the Magus that well. So you buy Ob Shard. So like 90% of mages or DPS guardians, whatever, end up buying Ob Shard because, well, you have to, because that's the pen item. You can't not buy it. So you get Ob Shard. And so they don't really like the idea of everybody just having to just buy Ob Shard because that's kind of boring. So what they want to do is they want to get mages away from having to buy Ob Shard every single game and make flat pen less OP when you can abuse it. Take away this early Spear of the Magus 70 billion flat penetration that Merlin procs on you, so you have 0 protection, so you're taking true damage from Merlin. Basically is what they want to get rid of. And they also want to give Guardians more ways to deal damage. That's not through flat penetration. So instead of like your Guardian building Void Stone and Stone of Binding in order to get flat pen to deal early burst damage, they don't really want Guardians doing early burst damage, but they don't mind them doing more damage later in the game by having more percent pen instead of flat pen. That's kind of where they're coming at this from. On the whole, as I've already read through this stuff, I kind of like the direction that they're going with this. Wow, I'm smacking my mic. One, because it is a giant overarching change to the system, and I like big changes because it messes up metas and builds, and then you have to learn new things, and you get to try new things, and when there's no meta, everybody's just focusing on having fun and trying things, and I really like that. So I'm excited about all this upcoming stuff. So what they've done is they have really reworked a bunch of items. They've taken away some side stats on items and instead giving them penetration. They've given some items more power, taken away power, and we're going to go literally down into the actual items to discuss them here in just a second. So the big changes at the start is going to be Ob Shard will now provide 20% magical penetration as a stat, and a new passive replacing the old one that now gives you 10% additional magic pen on a single damaging ability with an internal cooldown. This bonus can exceed the penetration cap. The penetration cap percentage-wise being 40%, so theoretically this could overcap to 50% on that ability. This will have an increased cost, but it will retain its low amount of magical power. So they still want Obsard to be a large percentage pen item, but they don't just want it being the end-all, be-all item where you buy Obshard to get all of your magical penetration and then you don't have to worry about it at all. So instead, it'll still give you a large chunk and it'll have the ability to go over cap to really real deal with tanky characters if you need to have 50% on ability. Moving forward, Demonic Grip decreased percent magical protection reduction per stack slightly. So Demonic Grip will basically be less effective. It will take away less magical protections per stack. That's fine. Pythag's Peace removed 10% cooldown, added 10% magical penetration. So you can see now where this is going. They are adding penetration percentage to like every mage item, but taking away other things in order to kind of even out the damage. But it means that basically, no matter what items, no matter what build you want to run, your build on your mage will basically always have capped penetration. We're going to keep going through it. Typhon's Fang decreased magical power, added 10% magical penetration. Reminder, this 10% magical penetration can be stacked up to 40%, with the notable exception that the Obshard passive will exceed the cap on that proc to make it 50%. Otherwise, it caps at 40. Soul Reaver increased the cost, decreased its magical power, added 10% magical penetration. Shaman's Ring being reworked into a completely new item and added 20% magical penetration. So Shaman's Ring will once again, for the 10,000th time, be getting reworked into another new item because it's not a new season of Smite if it's not a new iteration of Shaman's Ring. That's just how Smite works. It's just a part of the balancing. Every year, you get a redone Shaman's Ring, period, all the time. Next up, an exciting change. Warlock Staff added 10% magical penetration, as is apparent to what we're doing. Reduced base health from 200 to 150. Passive stack number, health, power, and mana bonuses adjusted. Now, while we don't know the exact stats, what this sounds like is that they're reducing the maximum stacks for Warlocks. It seems to be that they're going to add this magical pen, take a little bit away from the base HP, and then bring back Warlock Staff. So instead of 100 stacks, maybe it's 50, maybe it's 75, and then adjust those bonuses that you get from it, from the health, power, mana, accordingly. So it looks like they want to bring back Warlock Staff as a viable item by making it have less stacks. So that way you can get it quicker. That's what it's kind of looking like right now. Staff of Mirrodin added 10% magical penetration, decreased magical power. So, we now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 additional percentage pen items right here off the bat. 5 of which give you 10%. 2 now, 1 additional plus Obshard give you 20%. And then Obshard gives you an additional 10. So you very, very, very easily should have 20+% pen in your build. No matter basically what you're building, you're going to find a way to get at least 20% pen. Whether it's just buying the Obshard or the Shaman's Ring, whether it's buying Typhon's Fang and Warlock Staff, whatever. you're basically always going to have some percent pen, no matter what. Moving forward, this is where things become, so that's all very like buff-like, right? Like, oh, look at all this pen I can get. Pen and pen and pen and pen and pen, and that's great. But then you get down to the flat pen changes. They are trying to curve down the early game power curve on mages. So instead of being able to get a bunch of flat pen early, aka things like Spear of the Magus, they are removing a lot of flat pen from mages' kits. This is both to affect guardians and mages. So instead of you being able to build up a bunch of flat pen early to burn down squishies by giving them basically 0 magical defenses, so you're doing true damage, they instead want to put the emphasis on percentage pen. So that way, later in the game, as people start to become tanky, you can deal with all their tankiness without necessarily giving you true damage against the enemy's ADC at the 9-minute marker. I'm into it. Cool beans. So, without seeing the exact stats, gonna be a little bit interesting. But new Spear of the Magus could be a little bit strong. Spear of the Magus, new passive, replacing the old passive of flat pen, now does increasing damage from subsequent hits of the same ability. So hypothetically, if Gooby were to ult you, his second tick would do more damage than his first tick. And his third and fourth and fifth and sixth tick would do more damage than the previous iterations of those. So, while beforehand, subsequent hits of abilities gave you more flat penetration, now subsequent hits of abilities will literally just do more damage. So, Zonquilt, Merlin, Gooby. Now, we don't have the exact numbers, so we don't know how crazy this is. It could not be super crazy. You know, it could be some sort of minor increase. Or not, but there's no way for us to just tell that. But it is interesting to say the least. So, that factors into our next statement, which is that flat pen basically across the board is getting removed. So Shoes of the Magi right now, you might have forgot they were in the game because nobody buys them over cooldown boots, are losing their 10 penetration, but gaining 20 magical power. 75 magical power is a lot of magical power for boots, but losing 10 flat pen is also a significant nerf. Part of me says tomato. In the early game, it's probably fairly even, but I still don't know if it would make them better than cooldown boots, which are already picked up like 95% of the time. So it's a little bit hard to say, but I don't think this change would make you pick them up more so than the cooldown boots that you're already buying. But to be determined. Voidstone. Voidstone, you might know, right now has flat pen on it, but not anymore. They're increasing the magical power from 20 to 40, and they're reworking the passive, so now that it gives a 10% magical protection reduction, which is interesting. So instead of that doing flat pen, now percentage pen, AoE percentage pen, right? Pretty cool. Pretty nice. Should still cap at 40. So it should stack with your other pen, but it shouldn't exceed 40%. So if you had 40%, I don't think this would help you at all. No, that's a lie. That's a lie. I just lied to you. If it is a 10% magical protection reduction, I lied to you. The way that it should work is it should work the way that Void Stone works now, which is that it doesn't actually count towards your penetration. It is reducing their protections. So instead of it applying directly to your pen, it should remove their 10% of their magical protections first, and then you apply your penetration. So if you had 40% max capped percent pen, and somebody on your team had this, then effectively they've lost 10% of their protections, and then you are burning through 40% of that leftover number. So yes, it should stack. I apologize for getting that wrong at first. I did read that wrong. So yes, theoretically it should stack. Just like the way that Void Stone works now. Right now, the hard flat pen cap in the game is 50. Void Stone, Void Shield goes over those caps because it doesn't actually give your character pen. It just reduces their protections. So it doesn't function in exactly the same way. Stone of Binding. Decreased physical and magical penetration on passive trigger. You see a trend here. Dynasty Plate Helm reworking to be a more clear hybrid item and have no flat penetration. So you can see they're very obviously making a conscious effort to take flat pen off of magical items almost entirely, not quite entirely, but really, really removing a bunch of flat penetration and bringing in a bunch of new percent penetration for mages on a bunch of different builds to allow you to mix and match on different mages, different items that work better for them, and to still have pen, to still be able to kill tanks, but not necessarily kill the squishies any faster. On top of all of these changes that you just saw, with all these items getting changed with magical pen and losing things and gaining things, that's not all the changes that you're going to be seeing going into Season 7 for magical items. There's also going to be generic magical power changes, which is to say the following items will all be gaining magical power: Spear of Desolation, Rod of Tahuti, Soul Gem, Polynomicon, Chronos Pendant, and Telkine's Ring will all have more magical power on them than they do now. Every single one of those items will be receiving increased magical power. Roughly, give or take, expected to be about 10 to 15 magic power per item. So all of those items will be gaining some power. A bunch of your other items will be gaining percent pen. And as the trade-off, you will be losing flat pen as a trade-off. That's basically all the magic item stuff. At the very end, they touch on the fact that they are also going to be looking at physical items a little bit, but not so much physical items as much as physical penetration. So it looks like they're doing basically a complete rework of all the magic items, as you've seen. They will not be doing a complete rework of physical items, but they will be nerfing the following physical items: Titan's Bane, Void Shield, and Executioner. So they're also taking a swipe at physical penetration, and they will be reducing that across the board. But you can expect those three items to have their penetrations reduced. In order to make up for this, I forget if it mentions it in this article or if it was a different article, but something like hunters will be having buffs to their crit items later on. They're going to be talking about that. So for all you hunter players out there, don't get worried. Your pen is getting nerfed a little bit. It's okay. Your crit's going to get buffed. We haven't seen all the physical item changes yet, stuff like that. But that is their big sweep this year in items, is going to be magical items getting the big brunt of all that force. So a lot of the itemization efforts going in. To be noted, a couple of new items are going to be in the game as well. Dynasty Plate item is getting completely reworked. We have Shaman's Ring getting completely reworked. That doesn't factor in any new items that are being added to the game they don't want to tell us about, if any physical items get reworked, etc. So all of that craziness is happening for the upcoming Season 7. On the whole, I expect this to be actually a good change. You've got a more consistent power curve from mages, where as the game gradually goes on, they're going to be doing more and more damage because they get that percent pen, but they won't necessarily hit level 8, finish that Spear of the Magus, and then just start one-shotting you out of nowhere because they've got 70 flat pen, which is good. Consistency in knowing kind of damage spikes more easily is good for the game. But on the whole, I think this is actually going to be a buff to mages, between the fact that there's going to be more farm on the map for mid laners, getting more XP there, having a more consistent power curve, having all these build varieties, no matter whether you're a Vulcan or a Gubis or a Scylla, being able to buy the items that are best for you and not having to worry about pen, because you're just going to get pen basically by existing as a mage at this point, I think could be very good for mages on the whole, particularly for variety of builds. I think this might really open up the fact that we could see like meta builds per mage instead of like a mage meta build. You know, Gooby will have his build that works perfect, and then Merlin can have his, and Scylla can have hers, and Rock can have his, instead of just being like, well, you just buy boots and do Morbid and you call it a day. So I'm excited to see